welcome back. This is World Talks here on TPP World. I'm Sadia Stremska. A flurry of high-level talks and events has taken place over the last several days in Europe and beyond. To unpack the implications of US-Russia talks, Munich Security Conference and the Paris meetings, I have Ján Michalčák, former head of Unit for Countering Hybrid Threats at the Czech Ministry of Defense, here with me. Good morning, sir. Great.
Good morning. Pleasure to be with you.
So before we embark on our discussion, let me start with a breaking story. Yet another undersea cable has been damaged in the Baltic Sea, and the Swedish Coast Guard dispatched a vessel to investigate this further. My question is, do you think that this is another sabotage by Russia?
Definitely a really real possibility. Of course, this is a breaking news story, as you said, so we don't know anything definitive at this moment, but it would be a pattern that we've seen from Russia happening over and over again. And given what's been happening in the US-Russia relations and how emboldened Putin might feel right now, I would expect attacks like that one to be happening more and more often, because Russia would like to show muscle, so to speak, to Europe and the rest of the world.
Right, but at the same time, I mean, Vladimir Putin is in a better position than ever, right? Because he reopened dialogue with the United States. So why would he try and conduct this kind of actions? Wouldn't that sort of weaken his position?
You're exactly correct. He is in a better position, and I would almost say that he's never been in a better position in this war, that he himself started, and it's not justified at all, by the way. But exactly because he's never been in a better position, exactly because he's feeling strong, he would want to show us muscle, because he is the one dictating the tempo of the negotiation. Although Donald Trump, the US president, likes to be known as the one dealing from the position of strength and knowing how to get a deal done, he is not negotiating from a position of strength, because we're probably going to talk about it later in more detail, but Putin is now the one holding the cards. So why not show some more aggression toward the world in Europe and maximize his gains even more before a potential peace or ceasefire agreement comes into force?
And do you think that this could actually make the rift that is sort of appearing here, right, between the US and the EU even bigger? Because we have, Marco Rubio, for instance, talking about new opportunities with Russia, both geopolitical and economic, right? At the same time, we have the EU trying to impose the new package of sanctions. So, of course, these views are divergent. And on top of that, isn't Vladimir Putin trying to sow more discontent?
I don't want to be a doomsayer, but of course, this is a really strained period in US-Europe relations. Just a few hours ago, or even minutes before we started this talk, there was another breaking news saying that the US is actually pushing the G7 to get rid of their phrasing that put Russia as the aggressor in the conflict. They want to get rid of any such statement mentioning Russia as the aggressor, which again would be a massive aspect creating the rift between the US and not only Europe, but other Ukraine's allies, for example, in the G7, because we should not put Ukraine and Russia on the same level. It is very clear to everyone who's had any sort of formal education and has been following the world's news in any capacity that Russia is the aggressor. And seeing the US, who I still would like to believe is our ally, basically repeating Kremlin propaganda, is really painful for me. And obviously, the allies are not going to take it lightly. So yes, the rift is a really real possibility, and we see it increase every single day.
Right, so you're an expert on hybrid threats. I assume that it also includes propaganda and disinformation. And of course, you've mentioned this, but also Zelensky mentioned that Donald Trump is living in a disinformation bubble, so to speak, right? So where is this stemming from? How did he get there? I mean, what kind of influence was yielded that US is pursuing this rhetoric?
That's a great question. Partly it would be just a speculation, but if we take a look at Donald Trump's team, we see people who have been really sympathetic to Russia. And Donald Trump himself has been active on social media, his own Truth Social and X, basically nonstop. And if you've been on any of those two social networks in the recent past, you see that it's basically become a cesspool of propaganda, disinformation, or at the very least misinformation and unverified pieces of information. So he has been living in this bubble. Elon Musk, his close ally, has spent the whole of yesterday basically spreading the worst of the Kremlin propaganda about Ukraine, which we've then seen Donald Trump himself repeated. Just a few examples. He said that Ukraine was the one to have started the war, which is definitely false. He said that Zelensky is just a bad comedian, which is exactly the phrasing that the Kremlin has been using, basically dismissing Zelensky as a rightful leader of Ukraine. And the last piece of example, he said that Zelensky is not a legitimate leader of Ukraine. So if anything, the Kremlin must be opening champagne right now, because he's been saying the exact same things Putin has been repeating for 3 years now and using that as his excuse to attack Ukraine in the first place.
Right, and I just wanted to follow up on Zelensky allegedly, not of course according to Trump, being not a legitimate leader in Ukraine. Of course, there are no voices coming from Ukraine saying that, and European leaders have also taken a stance. For instance, Emmanuel Macron has said that it is absolutely not true. But do you think there could be an attempt by Russia to install a different leader in Ukraine ahead of the peace talks? Because there's been some talk, right, that the new leader should take over ahead of the peace talks between Ukraine and Russia.
Definitely. On a more general level, maybe just to explain to your viewers why this claim got to see the light of the world in the first place, it's because quite logically, Ukraine has not had an election since the start of the war, which is quite normal. And we've seen that happen in basically all countries all around the world when the said country is at war with someone. Just as an example, the United Kingdom did not have an election for 10 years during World War II, because the country is simply at war. And, for example, even the territories now occupied by Russia are still constitutionally part of Ukraine. And the question is, logically, how do you make sure that the election takes place in those territories as well? So it is constitutional, quite normal that the election doesn't take place. But the Kremlin and now Donald Trump as well has been using that to paint Zelensky as an illegitimate leader. And to the second part of the question, of course the Kremlin will want to use that to get rid of Zelensky and install a puppet regime in Kyiv. Just to remind you, one of the stated goals of the invasion in the first place that are still valid is to quote-unquote denazify Ukraine. And that Putin himself and his spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, said that basically means a change of the regime. And what regime would the Kremlin want to see installed in Kiev? Of course, a regime more sympathetic and a regime that would basically strip Ukraine of its sovereignty and be, a puppet regime of the Kremlin. So yes, that's basically the goal. And now Donald Trump is assisting that goal because he said he's not going to help Ukraine unless Ukraine agrees to the Kremlin's demands. And one of those demands is to install a puppet regime in Kyiv.
Right, and on top of that, there's this question of rare earth minerals that the U.S. is again, pushing to strike that deal with Ukraine. We've heard Trump bring it up again. We also heard Mike Waltz talk about this. But I wanted to ask you about a different place. I wanted to ask you about Greenland, because we've also got some sound bites from Donald Trump saying we have to have Greenland. These are very recent. And of course, we know that Greenland is also very rich in these crucial minerals. So what is your take on that?
I mean, It would be funny if it wasn't that dangerous, because it is really dangerous. The rhetoric we've heard from Donald Trump, not only about Greenland, but also about Canada. His own spokesperson repeated at the White House yesterday that Canada is soon to become the 51st state of the U.S. And the logic is the same in terms of Greenland. And for Greenland, let's remember that 85% of people living in Greenland, according to a latest poll, said that they do not want to live under the U.S. influence or as part of the U.S. Per se. And more than 50% of Danes, because let's remember Greenland, of course, belongs to Denmark. Over 50% of Danish people now say that they see the U.S. as a threat. Which is just insane when you think about it. The U.S. should be considered our closest ally, but Donald Trump has been doing in this past month that he's been president again, all to alienate his closest allies. And again, who must be celebrating? Must be the Kremlin. Because if you think about it, Donald Trump is basically using the very same rhetoric toward his presumed allies as he had been against Ukraine before the start of the war. So, I don't want to even think about the implication if Donald Trump does decide to go through with that and somehow take Greenland, because first, people in Greenland do not want to see that happen. The EU does not want to see that happen. So what is the option? If Donald Trump really wants to do that, I can't think of anything else other than war. And are we really talking about a war between the U.S. and its allies? That's just insane, really.
Absolutely.
And really dangerous, by the way.
This is very worrisome. Let's hope this is just, a bad speculation. Ján Michalčák, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching World Talks. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World. World news coming right up.